Mary Sullivan was born in 1835 in County Cork, Ireland, a region distinguished by fertile farmland and the bustling port city of Cork. The decade of her birth was marked by widespread hardship, as tenant farmers struggled with high rents and repeated crop failures. Education was limited, especially for working-class families, leaving children like Mary with few opportunities beyond basic survival. Her childhood was further complicated by the loss of her mother, which thrust upon her the responsibility of managing domestic duties and caring for younger siblings. In 19th-century Ireland, this level of responsibility was common for girls, emphasizing family survival over personal growth or schooling. Mary's father, John Sullivan, eventually emigrated to America during the Great Famine, along with Mary's sister Julia, joining the over 1 million Irish who left the country to escape starvation. Mary remained in Ireland with her siblings, Catherine, John, and Patrick, facing ongoing scarcity, unemployment, and limited prospects in a post-famine landscape. Life continued to be harsh, and every day demanded practical solutions to survive. By the age of 16, Mary had been convicted of stealing a quilt, an offense that led to her sentencing to 7 years of transportation. This punishment was designed to serve both as deterrence and as a means of providing cheap labor to distant British colonies. The transportation process involved months of arduous travel on overcrowded ships, with strict discipline and meager rations. For Mary, this marked a dramatic turning point: separation from her remaining family, immersion in the penal system of Van Diemen's Land, and the start of a new, harsh chapter in her life, defined by colonial expectations and survival under constraint. Mary Sullivan's journey to Van Diemen's Land began aboard the ship John William Dare, which carried her across treacherous seas to the distant colony. She arrived in Hobart on May 22, 1852, facing a society in which female convicts were expected to enter domestic service immediately upon arrival. The voyage itself would have been grueling, with overcrowded decks, limited rations, and strict oversight from ship authorities. Upon disembarking, Mary was assigned to the household of Mr. George Dudfield on Melville Street, where her primary responsibility was the care of his children. This initial placement proved brief. Within 4 days, Mary was returned to authorities because she frequently complained of a headache and struggled to meet the demands of domestic work. For the following 3 weeks, she remained under supervision until deemed fit to resume duties. After this period of observation, Mary was assigned to assist in the household of Mrs. Langley, who cared for the children of Mr. Fraser, a man who had departed to seek fortune in the Victorian goldfields. Mary's duties in the Fraser household were alongside Mary Ann Palmer, another transported convict, who prepared meals and assisted with cleaning. Mary herself was tasked with looking after John, a boy aged 4, and Adeline Claraara, a girl aged 2. At first, Mary appeared attentive and diligent, managing her responsibilities with focus and apparent care. Her early experiences in the colony illustrate the rigid expectations placed upon female convicts, as well as the minimal guidance or support they received. These first weeks highlight the pressures Mary faced in adapting to unfamiliar domestic roles while navigating the demands of colonial supervision and the strict oversight of households that relied on transported labor. On the morning of Wednesday, July 7, 1852, unusual activity in the Fraser household began to draw attention. Bread, tea, and sugar were discovered missing, having been taken by Mary Sullivan. At first, this behavior did not immediately indicate a larger danger, though it was considered unusual and concerning. Shortly afterward, Mary Ann Palmer, who assisted in the household, discovered that little Adeline Claraara Blackburn Fraser, the 2-year-old child under Mary's care, had vanished. Alarmed, Mrs. Langley, the head of the household, immediately began a search of the premises. The 2 women quickly located the child's lifeless body in one of the water butts in the yard, a tragic scene that confirmed the worst fears of the household. The death was reported at once to Mr. Robb, a lodger, who promptly contacted Dr. Huxtable and the police to ensure proper investigation and medical examination. Detective Constable Chandler was instructed to locate Mary Sullivan, who was apprehended 2 days later on Murray Street in Hobart. Mary Ann Palmer was also taken in for questioning, although witnesses emphasized her good character and reliability within the household. The sequence of events that morning unfolded rapidly. First, the disappearance of provisions, then the discovery that a child was missing, followed immediately by the grim discovery of her body, and finally, the arrest of Mary Sullivan. These events demonstrated the swift response of household members and authorities to a sudden and serious incident. Witness accounts recorded at the time convey both the shock and the structured reporting required in such a case, emphasizing the seriousness with which colonial authorities treated the disappearance and death of a child. The morning of July 7th established the direct timeline of the crime, set the foundation for the inquest, and illustrated the reactions of those present as they confronted a tragic and shocking event in the Fraser household. An inquest was convened at the Fork Tavern on Brisbane Streets to examine the circumstances surrounding the death of Adeline Claraara Blackburn Fraser. Mrs. Langley, the head of the household, was the first to provide testimony. She explained that Mary Sullivan had been in her service for only a brief period and described her as quiet and neither particularly good nor poor in conduct. Mrs. Langley recounted that on the evening prior to the child's death, she had put the children to bed and confirmed that John, the boy, had seen Mary Sullivan lift his sister from the cradle early the following morning. Dr. Huxtable testified to the medical findings, confirming that Adeline had died of strangulation and that a wire cord had been tied tightly around her neck. He noted no other injuries, observing that the child appeared otherwise healthy and well cared for. Mary Burton, a blind lodger in the household, corroborated the timeline, stating that Mary Sullivan and Mary Ann Palmer had shared a room with the children and maintained a harmonious relationship, and that she had heard Mary Sullivan fetching water early that morning. Detective Constable Chandler provided evidence regarding the apprehension of Mary Sullivan on Friday and her subsequent custody. Mary Ann Palmer also testified, describing her distress upon discovering the child's body in the water butts, emphasizing the shock experienced by household members. After all witness accounts were presented, the coroner addressed the jury, summarizing key points and reviewing the sequence of events leading to the child's death. Based on the evidence, the jury returned a verdict of murder against Mary Sullivan. The inquest established the formal legal procedures followed in colonial Tasmania, presented witness testimonies, documented medical findings, and laid the essential groundwork for Mary Sullivan's trial. It highlighted the methodical investigation, the reactions of those involved, and the colonial authorities' approach to such a tragic and serious crime. Mary Sullivan's trial commenced on Wednesday, July 21, 1852, in Hobart, with the same witnesses who had testified at the inquest providing detailed accounts before the court. Mrs. Langley was the principal witness, describing the care she had provided for the Fraser children and recounting the events of July 7th, including Mary Sullivan taking bread, tea, and sugar from the household and subsequently leaving the premises. She detailed the discovery of Adeline Claraara Blackburn Fraser's lifeless body in the water butts and emphasized the shock this caused within the household. Mrs. Fraser, the child's mother, attempted to testify, but was overcome with grief and was unable to continue. The Crown prosecutor presented evidence linking the wire used to strangle the child to the type found on petticoats worn by female convicts, noting that fragments missing from Mary Sullivan's petticoat corresponded to the wire used in the crime. Dr. Huxtable confirmed his earlier findings regarding the strangulation, providing medical verification of cause of death. Additional witnesses reinforced the timeline of events and Mary's presence in the Fraser household at the relevant times. Mary Sullivan did not call any witnesses, present a defense, or cross-examine those testifying against her, reflecting the limited legal representation available to convicts, particularly those without financial means or formal education. Throughout the proceedings, she remained silent and did not actively participate in her defense. After all testimony had been heard, the judge summarized the evidence for the jury, outlining the sequence of events, the discovery of the body, and the forensic findings. Following deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Mary Sullivan was sentenced to death by hanging, and the court ordered that her body be handed over for dissection. The trial illustrates the operation of the colonial legal system, the evidentiary procedures employed, and the significant challenges faced by a young, unrepresented defendant within the 19th century Tasmanian judicial process. Following the trial of Mary Sullivan, Marianne Palmer, the other convict serving in Mrs. Langley's household, faced significant emotional challenges. The trauma of witnessing the death of little Adeline Claraara Blackburn Fraser left her deeply shaken. Shortly after the trial, Palmer reportedly left her post without permission and returned in an intoxicated state. She explained to Magistrate Wilmot that her behavior was not intentional misconduct, but the result of being profoundly affected by the tragedy. The magistrate, taking into account the extraordinary circumstances and the psychological toll of the child's death, chose to overlook this lapse in judgment. He permitted Palmer to continue her employment, but imposed strict conditions, requiring that she remain under supervision and obtain permission before leaving her duties. Palmer's experience highlights the intense emotional impact that such a violent and shocking event had on household staff, particularly young convicts who were already navigating difficult conditions within colonial institutions. Despite surviving the ordeal of transportation, harsh labor expectations, and social scrutiny, the psychological strain proved difficult to manage, emphasizing the human cost beyond the legal consequences. This period demonstrates how individuals closely connected to a crime scene experienced ongoing trauma while continuing to perform their assigned duties under supervision. Palmer's struggle illustrates the broader consequences of violent crime within the colony, affecting not only the immediate victims and perpetrators, but also those responsible for care and oversight. It emphasizes the enduring impact of witnessing a tragic death in a household setting and the delicate balance authorities attempted to maintain between discipline, supervision, and recognition of emotional distress among young convicts. After Mary Sullivan's conviction and sentencing, reports emerged suggesting that she had previously been considered insane while in Ireland. It was noted that she had spent time in the county lunatic asylum, and while awaiting transportation in Grange Gorman Jail, she reportedly experienced severe pains in her head and was warned by the matron not to be provoked. Observers during the trial also noted her apparent indifference and lack of engagement, as she did not cross-examine witnesses or offer any evidence in her defense. These factors prompted the medical board to file an appeal, arguing that she might not have been of sound mind at the time of the murder. They requested a thorough investigation into her mental state, emphasizing that executing an individual who was insane would be unjust. Public debate intensified, fueled by newspaper speculation regarding her mental stability and the appropriateness of hanging a teenage girl. Authorities eventually clarified that there were 2 women named Mary Sullivan aboard the John William Dare, and the reports of instability belonged to the other individual, not the convicted Mary Sullivan. Following investigation, authorities determined that Mary Sullivan, who had murdered Adeline Claraara Blackburn Fraser, appeared to have been of sound mind at the time of the crime. While some continued to speculate about possible periods of insanity affecting her actions, this could not be substantiated, and the official decision remained unchanged. This section explores the complexities of assessing mental state in 19th century colonial Tasmania, the legal considerations of insanity in capital cases, and the societal reactions to a young female convict facing execution. It illustrates the intersection of medical opinion, public perception, and legal procedure in determining whether a defendant's mental condition could influence sentencing or warrant reprieve. Mary Sullivan's execution was carried out on August 5, 1852, marking the end of her brief and tragic life. She was 16 years old at the time of her death. Authorities had reviewed her case, including the appeal concerning her mental state, and determined that she had been of sound mind at the time of the murder. With no further appeals available and the legal processes concluded, the death sentence was carried out by hanging. The execution was conducted under the standard procedures of the colony, reflecting the strict application of capital punishment in 19th century Tasmania. Mary's hanging brought finality to the case of Adeline Claraara Blackburn Fraser, concluding the legal proceedings that had followed the child's murder. The decision underscored the rigidity of colonial law and the consequences faced by young convicts, even those barely past adolescence. The sentence was not only a punitive measure, but also intended as a warning to others within the penal system, consistent with the colonial administration's approach to serious crimes. Mary's execution marked the irreversible outcome of the judicial system and highlighted the broader implications of transportation, convicts' vulnerability, and the unforgiving nature of colonial justice. Her death concluded the legal chapter of this case, leaving a lasting impact on the community, the Fraser family, and the surviving household staff, emphasizing the irreversible and tragic consequences of the events that had unfolded in Hobart.